She mistakenly proposed to the Alpha King when drunk, but now he wants her to keep her promise. The streets glittered with lanterns, their soft light reflecting off cobblestones polished from centuries of use. Music floated through the air, cheerful yet somehow carrying a melancholy undercurrent that only someone who had grown up in the shadow of the castle could notice. Tonight, she decided, she would enjoy herself. She adjusted the hem of her gown, the deep green silk brushing against her ankles, and laughed softly at her reflection in the mirror of her chamber. It was a rare sight. Ilara alone, without the ever-watchful eyes of her family or the nobles who constantly measured her worth in marriage prospects. She poured herself a cup of wine, intending to toast to her own freedom, if only for a few hours. By the time she entered the castle's main hall, the festival was in full swing. Nobles in fine clothes mingled with performers, dancers twirling in intricate patterns that left trails of color in the firelight. Ilara felt a thrill, a shiver that had nothing to do with the chill of the night air. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, catching snippets of conversation, snippets of gossip and laughter that seemed almost fragile against the weight of the castle's history. It was then she saw him. Kalen, the Alpha King, stood at the center of the hall like a storm waiting to break. His presence drew attention effortlessly, yet he did not seem to crave it. Even across the room, his dark eyes seemed to pierce everything they fell upon, assessing, weighing, judging, but never revealing. His armor, not ceremonial but practical and finely crafted, gleamed in the firelight, and the cloak that draped over his shoulders gave him a look both regal and untouchable. He was the kind of man who made even the bravest nobles falter in their conversation. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She had heard stories about him since she was a girl, tales of his strength, his cunning, and his coldness. Some said he ruled with a fist of iron, others whispered that he carried a curse no human could ever understand. Yet here he was, alive and terrifyingly present, a man who seemed untouchable in every way. And yet, there was a pull, a strange magnetic force that made her want to defy her own caution. She took another sip of wine, letting the warmth slide down her throat, loosening the rigid restraint that had always kept her polite and careful. Perhaps it was the wine, or perhaps it was the reckless thrill of being alive, but when Kalen's gaze finally fell on her, she felt a boldness she had never known. "Why do you stare like that?" she asked softly, half to herself, half to the universe. Her voice carried more courage than she felt. He stepped closer, a shadow moving through the glow of the hall. "Because you are not like the others," he said, his voice deep and steady, like a river carving through stone. "You speak with a fire they lack." Ilara laughed a little nervously. "I suppose fire can be dangerous even if it's small." Kalen's lips curved ever so slightly, but it was enough to unsettle her. Dangerous, perhaps, or perhaps it is exactly what is needed. Her pulse quickened. A few more steps and she found herself standing before him, far closer than etiquette or sense would allow. She raised her cup half in jest, half in challenge. "Then, King Kalen," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them, I think I should marry you." The hall went quiet. Music faltered, and even the dancers seemed to pause mid-step. Ilara's stomach sank. She had meant it as a joke, drunk and foolish as it was. Yet Kalen's eyes, dark and sharp, bore into hers as though he weighed the weight of every word she had ever spoken. For a long, impossible moment, he said nothing. Then slowly he smiled, not cruelly, not mockingly, but in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. "You do." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried a force that left no room for doubt. "You would propose to me, fully and willingly, with such ease." Ilara's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth to explain, to laugh it off, to retract the words she had no right to speak. But the room seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with a tension she could not name. Every noble present seemed frozen, aware that a scandal had been declared before it could even be defined. I was joking," she stammered, wishing for the floor to open beneath her. "It was the wine." Kalen tilted his head, studying her. "Jokes have consequences, Alara." The way he said her name, so deliberate and precise, made her shiver. "You spoke it, you offered it, now the words are yours to keep." Panic surged through her. She had never felt so exposed, so small before a man who seemed larger than the world itself. And yet, there was a thrill, a dangerous pull that made her stomach twist in a way she could not understand. "You can't mean," she began, but he interrupted. "I mean exactly that," Kalen said. "Promises spoken under the moonlight carry weight. I will hold you to yours." Alara swallowed hard, trying to gather her courage. The hall seemed to spin around her, and she clutched her cup as if it could anchor her to reason. I never meant it," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, this was—" Kalen stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his presence. "Intentions matter little," he said. "Words once given are chains in their own right." "You will learn that soon enough." Her mind raced. How could she escape this? How could she undo what had been said? And yet, despite the fear twisting her stomach, a strange curiosity stirred within her, a pull toward the man who spoke with such certainty, who seemed to carry both power and loneliness in his gaze. The courtiers murmured, some with shock, some with amusement, but none dared approach. Kalen's presence alone commanded respect, fear, and awe all at once. And for Alara, it commanded attention of a far more dangerous sort, a mixture of fear and fascination that she could not name. "Come with me," Kalen said abruptly, turning toward the private chambers. His steps were purposeful, and she found herself following, almost of her own accord. The hallway was quiet, lined with tapestries depicting battles and victories long past. The torchlight flickered against the stone walls, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed alive. Once inside, Kalen closed the door, the sound echoing like a warning. He did not sit, did not smile, did not speak immediately. He simply regarded her, and the silence pressed upon her chest as if it were a living thing. "I am giving you a choice," he said finally, voice low and deliberate. "You may leave now and the consequences will fall upon you, or you may stay and face them with me." Alara's throat went dry. She had expected anger, punishment, perhaps mockery, but not this calm, measured threat. She looked at him, trying to read his expression, trying to find any hint that this was some cruel jest. She found none. I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean what I said. I was drunk." Kalen's gaze softened just a fraction, and he took a slow step closer. "Intentions are often lies we tell ourselves to escape truth. Your words were truth enough. The question is whether you will honor them." Alara's mind reeled. She had never faced a man like this, a man who commanded not just armies but the very air around him. Her heart pounded, and her breath came in short, quick bursts. She wanted to run, to hide, to laugh it off, but a strange part of her, deeper than fear, deeper than reason, whispered that there was more to this than scandal, more than punishment. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," Kalen said, as if reading her thoughts. "Fear does not suit you, yet it lingers. Courage does not come naturally to most, yet you wield it with reckless abandon. That is why your words matter." Alara's pulse quickened. She felt a strange mix of defiance and attraction, fear and longing, swirling inside her in a way she could not control. The room felt smaller, the shadows closer, and his presence overwhelming yet compelling. "Why me?" she whispered, almost to herself. "Why would you choose me for this?" Kalen's eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to a tone that was almost a whisper. "Because you dared to speak the truth, even in jest. Because your spirit challenges me." He stepped closer, and she felt the weight of him, the power and the danger, and something else, something she could not name. "Because promises are not given lightly, and you have given yours." Alara closed her eyes, trembling, knowing that whatever came next, her life had shifted. She could feel it in the way her heart raced, in the way the air seemed thick with expectation, in the way the Alpha King stood before her, patient yet unyielding, commanding her attention and daring her to resist. And in that moment she understood, some mistakes were not merely accidents, some mistakes could change everything. She opened her eyes. Kaelin waited. The promise had been made. And now, whether she wanted to or not, she was caught in a current that might carry her to danger, or something far more unexpected. The firelight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts around them. Alara took a slow breath, her gaze meeting his, and in the quiet the words echoed in her mind. Promises spoken under the moon are never forgotten. Alara could not forget the look in Kaelin's eyes that night, the calm certainty, the intensity that felt almost like a force pressing against her chest. She thought she had made a mistake with her drunken words, yet now they seemed to hang between them like an unbroken chain. She had tried to convince herself to ignore it, to pretend it had been nothing more than a joke, but the more she tried, the more impossible it became. The days after the festival passed in a haze of whispers. Courtiers spoke behind closed doors, and servants cast curious glances when they passed her in the halls. Even those who normally ignored her seemed to sense something unusual, something dangerous and magnetic, linking her to the Alpha King. Kaelin did not speak of the proposal openly, but his presence reminded her constantly. He was there in the throne room when she entered, silent and watching, his dark eyes following her like a shadow she could not shake. He walked the halls with the same calm, controlled power as always, but now there was an added tension in the air, a subtle claim that she felt even when he said nothing. Alara tried to continue her daily routines, attending to her noble duties, practicing etiquette, and maintaining the illusion of composure. Yet even as she moved through the castle, she could feel Kaelin's influence like a current beneath the surface, guiding her, testing her, reminding her of her words. It was during one of these mornings in the castle gardens that the first true challenge came. The gardens were vast, filled with dark foliage and winding paths that seemed to stretch endlessly. She walked along a familiar path, the morning mist curling around her feet, when Kaelin appeared, emerging from the shadows as silently as a whisper. "You walk as if you seek escape," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "Do you think you can avoid your promise?" Alara stopped, gripping the folds of her gown. I am trying to understand it," she admitted. "I never intended for it to mean anything." Kaelin tilted his head, stepping closer. "Intentions do not undo words. You spoke them willingly. You gave them power by saying them aloud." He paused, and his gaze softened for just a moment, revealing the weight of a loneliness she had not expected. "The question is whether you will honor them with courage or falter under fear." Her heart quickened, a mixture of defiance and fear rising within her. She wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of her chambers, yet some unexplainable force held her in place. Kaelin's presence was magnetic like gravity, drawing her closer even as her mind screamed to resist. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, barely audible. "I am not made for this, for a king, for promises like that." Kaelin studied her carefully, his gaze intense, yet patient. "You are stronger than you believe, Alara. That is why I chose you, not because you are perfect, not because you are fearless, but because you will not crumble when tested." Alara's stomach twisted at his words. The mixture of praise and power was dizzying. She wanted to speak, to protest, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, filled with something she could not name, anticipation, longing, and a challenge she could not ignore. "Come," Kaelin said abruptly, turning toward the castle. "You will not face this promise alone, but you must begin to understand the consequences." She followed him reluctantly, and the halls felt different now, closer, almost alive, echoing with their footsteps. Kaelin led her to a room she had never entered before, a study filled with ancient tomes, scrolls, and artifacts that seemed to hum with power. The scent of old paper and incense filled the air. "Knowledge is power," Kaelin said, gesturing to the books. and understanding your place in this kingdom and in my life requires it." Alara hesitated, unsure whether he meant literal knowledge or something deeper. Kalen studied her, and then, as if reading her thoughts, he said, "I am not a man to be taken lightly. Neither is your promise. You will learn that the stakes of words are often higher than the stakes of swords." Days passed, and Kalen's lessons were subtle. He did not force her to obey, nor did he demand loyalty openly. Instead, he tested her in quiet ways, observing how she handled small disputes among servants, seeing if she noticed the hidden dangers in the castle's political currents, watching how she reacted to moments of tension. He offered guidance, sometimes in the form of conversation, sometimes through gestures that seemed minor but carried weight. Alara began to realize that Kalen's power was not just in his strength or authority. It was in his patience, his observation, his ability to make her aware of herself, of her courage, and of her limits. She found herself thinking of him constantly, wondering what he saw when he looked at her, and struggling against feelings she did not understand. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in hues of purple and gold, Kalen found her in the castle library. The room smelled of old books and the faint tang of candle wax. She had been reading about the history of the Alpha Kings, learning of their triumphs and failures, and the shadows of curses that often followed their bloodline. "You read as if seeking a way to escape me," Kalen said quietly, leaning against the doorway. Alara jumped slightly, then laughed nervously. I just want to understand. Everything about you, about this kingdom, about this," she gestured vaguely, feeling awkward. Kalen stepped closer, his shadow falling across the table. "Understanding is not escape," he said. "It is the first step toward choice. You will need knowledge before you can make the right one." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. "Choice, but what if my choice is wrong?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kalen's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Wrong choices are not always permanent. Courage and honesty can correct many errors, but fear, deception, and denial, they are far harder to undo." The weight of his words pressed upon her. She had never met a man who commanded her attention so completely, who made her question herself in ways that were both terrifying and exhilarating. She looked at him, and in that quiet library, she felt the first stirrings of something deeper than fear or obligation. Something that made her heart ache in ways she could not name. As the weeks passed, Kalen's subtle lessons became more personal. He invited her to walk with him through the castle's hidden passages, showing her secret gardens, chambers filled with artifacts, and towers where the wind carried whispers of the past. Each time, he observed her reactions carefully, sometimes offering gentle corrections, sometimes allowing her freedom to make mistakes. Alara began to see him differently. Behind the mask of the Alpha King, the armor, the command, the distance, was a man who carried burdens she could barely imagine. A man who had been shaped by power, by loneliness, and by a history of choices that had left him wary of trust. She began to understand why he had claimed her drunken words, why he had decided that she could not simply walk away. And yet, despite the growing respect she felt, there was tension. Every time he looked at her, there was a spark of something unspoken, something dangerous. She felt it in the way her pulse quickened, the way her stomach twisted when he was near, and the way words seemed inadequate when she tried to speak to him. One night, under the silver light of a full moon, Kalen led her to the castle balcony overlooking the kingdom. The wind tugged at her hair and the stars above seemed impossibly bright. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Do you understand the weight of words, the consequences of promises?" Alara swallowed, her hands gripping the stone railing. I think I do," she admitted. "I never imagined that a mistake could feel like this, that a few words could carry so much power." Kalen's gaze met hers, intense and unwavering. "Words are only the beginning. Actions give them weight. Choices give them life. You will see that soon enough. Her heart raced. She wanted to run, yet she could not. She wanted to resist, yet some part of her, the part that had first felt the magnetic pull of his presence, wanted to stay, to learn, to understand. "Kalen," she began, then stopped. She did not know what to say, did not know how to express the swirl of fear, respect, and something else she could not name. He stepped closer, the moonlight casting shadows across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his features and the intensity in his eyes. "Do not speak unless you mean to," he said quietly. "Feel, learn, observe. That is how you will survive and perhaps even grow." Alara nodded, unable to meet his gaze fully. She felt small beneath his presence, yet not weak. There was a strange strength in the way he challenged her, the way he refused to let her ignore her own courage. And then, without warning, he turned and walked back into the castle, leaving her alone on the balcony. The wind tugged at her gown, and she realized that she was trembling, not from cold, but from the intensity of what she felt. The promise she had made in drunken jest was no longer a joke. Kalen had claimed it, and now it shaped every moment of her life. Every glance, every step, every thought seemed to circle back to him. And she knew, deep down, that the next choice she made could define not just her future, but his, and perhaps the fate of the kingdom as well. Alara closed her eyes and let the wind carry her thoughts. She had entered this world thinking she could escape consequences, thinking that words spoken carelessly were meaningless. Now she understood. Some words could not be taken back. Some promises were like rivers. They carried you forward whether you wanted to flow or not. And Kalen was the current that would not let her go. Ilara could feel the weight of the promise pressing on her heart more each day. Every glance from Kalen reminded her that her words were no longer just words. They were a chain, binding her to a man whose power and presence overshadowed everything around him. She had thought she understood him, yet each day revealed new depths, new shadows behind his dark eyes, and new vulnerabilities hidden beneath his strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the castle towers, Kalen summoned her to the uppermost tower, a room she had never entered before. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting ancient battles and kings long gone, their eyes seeming to follow her with silent judgment. The air smelled of candle wax and the faint scent of cedar, a strange comfort mingled with unease. "Why here?" Alara asked, her voice small but steady. She stepped inside cautiously, her gaze sweeping over the room. Kalen turned, his expression unreadable. "Because some truths cannot be spoken in the halls where others watch. Some lessons must be learned in silence and shadows." He gestured toward the balcony. "Come, look." Ilara moved closer and saw the kingdom sprawled beneath them, bathed in the soft golden light of dusk. The wind tugged at her hair and gown, carrying the scent of the forest and distant fields. She had walked these halls countless times, yet from this height the castle seemed different, smaller somehow, fragile, as if it could be swept away like a dream. Kalen's voice broke the silence. "You see the kingdom, yet you only see the surface. Power is not what most believe. Strength is not only in the sword or the throne. It is in control, in patience, in understanding the currents beneath what others notice." Alara swallowed hard. "And you have all of that." Her voice was tinged with awe. "It's intimidating." Kalen's eyes softened just slightly. "It is lonely as well," her heart faltered. "Lonely?" she whispered, confused. "I thought," she hesitated. "I thought someone like you could never feel loneliness." He stepped closer, the wind carrying his presence like a living thing. "Strength often hides pain. Power often hides fear. I have ruled for years, and yet I have never felt truly free, not until now with you." Alara's chest tightened. She wanted to look away, to resist the pull she felt, yet some part of her, the part that had been drawn to him from the very first night, could not. "With me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Kalen nodded. "Yes." "You challenge me in ways I did not expect. You force me to confront not just who I am, but who I might become. That is dangerous and yet necessary." Her mind spun. She had believed her words were a mistake, a fleeting folly in drunken jest. Now they seemed to hold the weight of destiny itself, and Kalen was no longer simply the Alpha King she had feared. He was a man who carried secrets, burdens, and a longing that matched her own. "You have a burden," she said slowly, trying to make sense of her thoughts. "Something you have never shared, something heavy." Kalen's eyes darkened and he looked away toward the horizon. "There is a curse," he admitted quietly. "A shadow that has followed my bloodline for centuries. It binds me, limits me, and tests me. My heart, my ability to live fully, is chained unless I bind a soul to me willingly. One who sees me, not just the crown, not just the power, but the man beneath." Alara's breath caught. "A curse," she whispered. "And you want me to?" He met her gaze, unwavering. "Yes. But not because I demand it. Because I believe you might see me as I am, not as I appear. This is not about control, Alara. This is about trust and courage and the willingness to face truths that most would flee from." Her stomach twisted, a mix of fear and fascination. She had come to understand Kalen as a man of immense strength and command, yet she had never seen such vulnerability in him. And now, confronted with the truth of his curse, the promise she had made in Drunken just took on a new dimension, one that was no longer a mistake, but a potential act of redemption. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kalen's gaze softened, but the intensity never left his eyes. "Then the curse remains and my life continues under its shadow. Perhaps I would survive, perhaps not, but my path would remain lonely. I cannot force you, Alara. I can only ask." She looked down, her fingers curling around the stone railing. She wanted to run, to leave this tower, this conversation, and perhaps this man behind. Yet the pull she felt, the unspoken bond, the dangerous curiosity, the growing admiration, and something deeper, kept her rooted in place. "You frighten me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "And yet I feel like I cannot turn away." Kalen stepped closer, the wind carrying the scent of cedar and candle. "That is the beginning," he said quietly. "Fear and courage often walk together. One does not exist without the other." They stood there in silence, watching the kingdom bathed in twilight. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rooftops. The wind stirred the leaves of the trees below, and for a moment the world felt suspended, as if holding its breath. Then, as if testing her resolve, Kalen took her hand gently. "I do not ask for promises lightly," he said, "nor do I accept them without consideration. You may speak your truth, your fears, and your desires. All are valid. But remember, once spoken, choices shape destiny." Alara's heart raced. The simple touch of his hand carried power she had not expected, a current that ran through her like fire. She realized that this was no longer a matter of drunken jest, nor of obligation alone. She had a choice, and that choice could alter both their lives forever. Days passed, and the castle seemed to take on a new rhythm. Kalen did not force her hand, yet his influence was always present. In the council chambers, he watched her silently as she observed debates, assessed arguments, and learned the subtle art of negotiation. In the gardens, he allowed her freedom but always observed, guiding without control, testing her courage and judgment. Alara began to notice the small details of his life. The faint scars on his hands, the way he carried himself when alone, the intensity in his gaze when he studied her. She discovered his vulnerabilities not through words alone, but through the subtle, patient ways he revealed them, a fleeting sigh, a quiet glance, a moment of hesitation. One afternoon, a messenger arrived with troubling news. Rival nobles were plotting against the throne. They sought to exploit the king's curse, believing it made him weak, and they whispered that the promise Alara had spoken could be used to manipulate him further. Kalen's jaw tightened. "They believe they understand power," he said quietly, pacing the floor of his private study. "Yet they cannot see its depths. Strength is not only in might but in patience, understanding, and the courage to face the truth." Alara watched him, feeling both awe and fear. "Do they know about your curse?" she asked cautiously. "Only fragments," Kalen replied. "And that is enough for them to act recklessly. But I will not allow their ignorance to threaten what must be protected." She felt a flicker of admiration. Here was a man who carried not only his own burdens but the weight of the kingdom. And yet, despite his strength, she sensed the loneliness that had marked him since birth. "Then we must be careful," she said softly. "We cannot let them manipulate us, or you." Kalen turned to her, his gaze sharp. "You speak with courage and wisdom, Alara. That is why I value you. That is why your promise matters." Her chest tightened. She realized that her drunken words were no longer a joke. They were a commitment, one that bound her not only to Kalen but to the destiny of the kingdom itself. The nights grew longer, filled with quiet conversations and moments of tension. Kalen shared fragments of his past, the loneliness of leadership, the weight of his curse, and the sacrifices he had made for the throne. Alara listened, absorbing every word, every nuance, and with each revelation, her fear mingled with understanding, her defiance softened by empathy, and her curiosity deepened into something she could not yet name. One night, as the moon shone high above, Kalen led her to the castle's hidden tower once more. The wind whipped through the open windows, carrying the scent of pine and rain. "You have learned much," he said quietly, his eyes reflecting the silver light. "But understanding is not enough. Courage is tested in action, in choice, and in trust." Alara's heart pounded. "And what choice do you ask of me now?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Kalen stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. "To remain by my side, not because you must, but because you choose to. To see me truly and to trust that I see you in return. That is the path to lifting the shadow that binds me, and perhaps to our freedom as well." Her fingers trembled as she reached out, almost instinctively. The wind carried their silence, and in that quiet moment the world seemed to hold its breath. She realized that she was no longer bound merely by drunken words, but by a choice she had yet to fully understand. A choice that could redeem him, change the kingdom, and perhaps transform her own heart in ways she had never imagined. The stars above seemed to whisper promises of their own, ancient and eternal, as if the very night sky acknowledged the shift in fate. Alara felt a shiver of anticipation and fear. She knew that the next step would not be easy, that danger lurked, that hearts could be broken, and that trust was fragile. Yet for the first time, she felt ready to face it. The night sky was heavy with stars, their silver light spilling over the castle in quiet witness to the events that were about to unfold. Alara stood at the edge of the balcony, her gown brushing the stone beneath her feet, and felt the weight of her choices pressing on her chest. The promise she had made in a moment of drunken jest had become a tether, one that had grown into responsibility, courage, and something far deeper that she could not yet name. Kalen approached silently, the wind carrying the sound of his footsteps like a whisper. He stopped beside her, tall and commanding, yet with a vulnerability that had become familiar over the past weeks. His gaze was intense, yet patient, holding her in a way that left her feeling both small and unbreakably connected. "You have seen the truth of the curse," he said quietly, his voice blending with the soft rustle of the wind. "You have seen the threats that lurk beyond the walls, and yet you stand here, willing to face it with me. That choice defines more than you know." Alara swallowed hard. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she admitted, her voice soft, trembling slightly. "I didn't know that a few careless words could change so much." Kalen reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Words have power, Alara. But it is your courage that gives them life." Her heart quickened. The man before her was not just the Alpha King of legend. He was a man who had been burdened with isolation, with a curse that weighed upon his soul, and yet he trusted her, sought her understanding, and offered her a place beside him. "You could leave," he continued, his hand lingering near hers. You do not have to face this. I cannot force you. Alara looked into his eyes, and for a moment the fear that had often gripped her melted away. She saw not just a king, not just a powerful man, but someone who had been shaped by loss, duty, and isolation. She realized that her feelings had shifted, evolving from fear and confusion into something more profound. "I will stay," she said softly, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Not because I promised, not because I am afraid, but because I choose to." Kalen's eyes darkened, and for a moment the intensity of his gaze was almost overwhelming. Then slowly a faint smile curved his lips, a rare, genuine expression that softened the harsh edges of the Alpha King she had feared. "Then we begin," he said, voice low and resolute. "Together." Their bond, fragile yet undeniable, was tested almost immediately. The rival nobles who sought to exploit Kalen's curse had struck under the cover of darkness, attempting to seize the castle through deceit and force. Alarms rang, echoing through the halls, and guards rushed to defend the walls. Kalen's presence was commanding, his strategy precise, yet the danger was real and immediate. Alara, standing at his side, felt her pulse quicken, not from fear alone, but from the realization that she was no longer an observer. She was part of this, entwined in the fate of the kingdom and the man she had come to care for. "Stay close," Kalen commanded, his voice steady, but beneath it a current of concern ran for her safety. She followed, her steps sure despite the chaos. Together, they navigated the corridors, their presence a quiet force that inspired courage in the guards and hesitation in the attackers. Alara marveled at Kalen's calm under pressure, the way he directed others, protected the innocent, and faced the threat head-on without faltering. Yet even amidst battle, Kalen never lost sight of her. His eyes found hers repeatedly, conveying reassurance, trust, and a silent question. Would she stand with him when the choice became ultimate? They reached the inner sanctum of the castle, where the rival nobles had gathered, confident in their perceived advantage. Kalen stepped forward, every movement precise, commanding, and controlled. Alara followed, her hand brushing against his, feeling the strength in his presence and the reassurance of their shared resolve. "Enough," Kalen's voice rang through the chamber, low but impossible to ignore. "Your plots end here. You have underestimated what binds this kingdom and underestimated what binds me." The room fell silent. Even the rival nobles, accustomed to power and intrigue, felt the weight of his presence. Kalen's eyes swept over them, and in that gaze they understood that their deception and arrogance would not prevail. Alara stepped forward slightly, her voice clear and unwavering. "Leave now," she said, echoing Kalen's command. "This is your only warning." There was a pause, a tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Then slowly, the nobles realized the unity and strength before them. Kalen and Alara, bound not only by promise but by trust, courage, and conviction. Reluctantly, they withdrew, leaving the castle in silence save for the soft crackle of torches. Kalen turned to Alara, his expression intense yet softened by relief. "You were brave," he said quietly, his hand brushing hers. "More than I expected." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You make it easier," she admitted, "because you believe in me." Kalen's gaze held hers unwavering. "It is because I trust you. You see me as I am, not as the world expects. That is rare and precious." The castle was safe, the threat removed, but the tension of the past weeks had left its mark. Kalen led Alara to the highest tower once more, the wind sweeping through the open windows and carrying the scent of pine and rain. They stood in silence, watching the stars, the kingdom beneath them bathed in moonlight. "You have made your choice," Kalen said softly. "And in doing so, you have changed not only my fate but the fate of this kingdom." Alara looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. "And you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Have you changed?" Kalen's eyes darkened and then softened. "I have," he admitted, "because I have seen courage, honesty, and trust where I expected fear and doubt. because you have challenged me, and in that challenge I have found a path to redemption, a chance to be free of the curse that has bound me for so long." Her breath caught. "Free," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "but it is not only the curse that is lifted. It is the fear, the loneliness, the doubt. With you, I am whole." Alara's chest tightened. She realized then that the bond between them was no longer merely a promise or obligation. It was something deeper, something that had grown through trials, danger, and understanding. It was trust, it was courage, it was connection, and it was love. Kalen stepped closer, his hand finding hers. The touch was gentle yet commanding, a reflection of the balance they had found together. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice low and steady. "The choice you made, the courage you showed, it has saved more than just me. It has saved us both." Alara nodded, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I do," she whispered, "and I would make the same choice again." The wind swept through the tower, carrying with it the quiet approval of the night sky, the stars shining like witnesses to their courage, their trust, and the bond they had forged. Alara and Kalen stood together, two figures bound not by power alone, but by respect, understanding, and a love that had grown from the depths of fear and uncertainty. "I chose you," she said softly, her voice carrying a certainty that had not been there weeks ago. Kalen's hand tightened around hers, a gentle yet unyielding promise. "And I will protect that choice," he said, "for as long as we live." They stood together, the moonlight casting their silhouettes against the stone tower, a symbol of their shared strength and newfound freedom. The kingdom stretched below them, peaceful for now, but alive with the knowledge that the Alpha King and his companion would face the future together, unafraid and united. Alara realized then that the drunken words that had started it all were no longer a mistake. They had been a beginning, a spark that had grown into trust, courage, and a bond that neither power nor curse could break. Kalen turned to her, his eyes reflecting both strength and vulnerability, and in that gaze she saw the man he truly was, the man she had chosen. And as dawn broke over the kingdom, painting the towers and gardens in gold and pink, Alara knew that they would face whatever came next together. No longer bound by fear, no longer uncertain, they stepped forward into the day, hand in hand, the promise of their hearts stronger than any curse, any threat, or any mistake. The kingdom, the curse, and the hearts of two people had been tested, and through courage, choice, and trust, they had emerged transformed. And so, in the quiet light of morning, the Alpha King and his chosen companion stood as one, a bond forged in words, strengthened by action, and sealed by love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings.